Hey, what's up, guys? This is me, Nisi of Spoil Me Nisi, back with another video. Today I have my husband, Kiss Move, and we wanted to do a video where we are talking about Jim Carrey and Eddie Murphy at the height of their career. So my husband feels that Eddie Murphy's height of his career was in the 80s and Jim Carrey's was in the 90s. So we're going to talk about it.
Yes, I think I came up with this idea because of your video, your Eddie Murphy. You highlighted a lot of his works, some of your favorite stuff, and I thought it would be a good idea because I think I don't know if you agree because I know some of your favorite Eddie Murphy films came out in the 90s, but I believe his height was the 80s, and I think someone who had a comparable or a nice run was Jim Carrey, and I felt his run was in the 90s, and I'm like, hey, if we put these two guys, careers, at least in film and some of the stuff, their highlights, their impact during their decade, who do you think was most impactful? If we had to pick, one had to go, who would it be? Would it be Eddie Murphy of the 80s or Jim Carrey of the 90s? And I think it should make for a nice spicy take.
I agree. But I'm a little biased because Eddie Murphy is a favorite of mine. So let's see. We'll go through the movies.
All right. So Eddie Murphy is he obviously skyrocketed in the 80s with some classics. I think his first film was like 48 Hours, early 1980s. He's also had Trading Places, which I find to be a classic. Believe it or not, you might have watched it multiple times. I think I've only watched it once with you.
Oh, I've seen Trading Places 100 times.
I still think I haven't seen it no more than that. Still think it's an absolute classic, and I'd love to watch it again.
For sure. Yeah.
He had some stuff that was there that I haven't quite seen, like Best Defense, but he really took off with the Beverly Hills Cop series in the 80s that came out, I think, in 84 and 87. He had a stand-up comedy also in the 80s. What was it called?
Raw,
yes.
Yeah. I saw it as a kid. Again, I probably should not have seen it when I was a kid, but I did. It was hilarious.
And not only that, he also had Coming to America, which is a classic, absolute classic. I know they just did a follow-up, but the original is, like I said, hands down classic, nothing wrong with it. And then he closed out the 80s with Harlem Nights, which had a lot of legendary people in there as well.
Like Della Reese.
Oh yeah. Richard Pryor was also in there.
Was Martin in Harlem Nights? I don't remember if Martin was in Harlem. No, right?
John Witherspoon.
Somebody else was in Harlem Nights.
Tommy Ford from Martin. Tommy Ford. Tommy.
Right.
Yeah, he was in there. He was in there. Great film. I like that movie as well. Now, I love Eddie Murphy just as much as you do. I could watch his classics, all day. I could binge him. But as good as impressive as Eddie Murphy was in the 80s, because it wasn't just films. He had the music, he had stand up. He was like pretty much the Michael Jackson of acting at that point, of comedy or whatever. But in the 90s, we had, even though Jim Carrey's been around, I feel like he took off in the 90s. And what helped get him jump started? He was a part of a well-known show that the black community would know. Do you recall?
Live in Color?
Live in Color, yeah. The whole Wayne's family,
Yeah. He was Fire Marshal Bill.
Yes.
He killed it. Yeah.
Absolutely. He got his start in Living Color. That that was a great show of the 90s. It was the adult all that, right? It was all that before all that, but it was the adult all that. But when Jim Carrey really took off, for me was pretty much in the 90s, and specifically 1994, when he just kind of had back to back hit movies, and these movies were
he did, yeah.
We got Ace Ventura, right? Pet Detective. We got The Mask, which is all-time classic. Yep. You got Dumb and Dumber, which was right after that. So he hit you with like a triple threat. And then he had the follow-up to Ace Ventura the year after, The Cable Guy. That was also in the 90s. You had Batman Forever. He played the Riddler. He's obviously not the main, but he was a
I
villain,
forgot about that.
and that's one of the best Batman movies, other than Dark Knight. Batman Forever, classic film. Jim Carrey was a part of that, and we had Liar Liar and the Truman Show. There was some other stuff that came out there, but he had a part, but it wasn't major, so I'm not counting those. But when you put up their movies in terms of where they're leading as lead roles, is 9 versus 9. Who 9 movie run was better? Eddie Murphy's in the 80s, Jim Carrey in the 90s.
So, like I said, I am a little bit biased, but I have to call a spade a spade. I almost called him Ace Ventura. Jim Carrey does give Eddie Murphy a run for his money there, but considering Eddie Murphy had all Beverly Hills Cops, and in the 80s he was actually in like classic movies. Not saying that Jim Carrey wasn't. I'm gonna have to give it to Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy. I would say I love Eddie Murphy's movies. The 90s hold a special place in my heart. I appreciate the 80s, even though I wasn't around technically for the 80s, but I studied the 80s, so that's why we kind of know a lot about the 80s, because we kind of just studied it. The 90s, we got to see it, and a lot was popping in the 90s. The music, the movies, the shows. And Jim Carrey was a part of that. Sure, Eddie Murphy even had stuff in the 90s that were pretty good. But when you consider, I feel like going to 99, like when I saw Jim Carrey's face, I knew Jim Carrey was like, okay, every time I seen Jim Carrey's going to be starring in a movie, I was like, I want to watch it because of those that back-to-back run. And you got Beverly Hills Cops, okay, nothing wrong with those, but the knock is that Eddie Murphy, and during those times, 80% of his gigs in movies was being a cop. Same role, just different themes. Obviously, I prefer Beverly Hills over his other roles, but the first 48 Hours, that was him being in doing the cop thing. He had a Best Defense. That's him being a cop. Again, The Golden Child, he's investigating something. I don't even know if he's a cop, but he's something close to a cop. He's
like a cop, yeah.
So I mean, he was pretty much kind of doing his usual stuff. I feel like Jim Carrey stuff, even though I felt like they were all good, they were all pretty different. With the Ace Ventura, with The Mask, Dumber and Dumber. Now one can argue, well, Jim Carrey's just Jim Carrey, because in all those roles he could play the goofy Jim Carrey. So he ain't start taking different roles until later in his career. But I don't know if I could say I don't know. There's a lot of The Mask, Dumb and Dumber, and Ace Ventura. Like I said, I'll put those 3 up against a couple Eddie Murphy's movies. Can I put them up against Trading Places, Coming to America, and the original Beverly Hills Cop? I'm not sure. But I think who had the more impact, would you say? Who do you think had the most impact?
I don't know, man. I would say Eddie Murphy. Only because the reason why I say that is because I'm cheating right now. I'm looking at my phone. Because when I look at like all of Jim Carrey's movies, and then I look at all of Eddie Murphy's movies in the 80s, literally all of Eddie Murphy's 80s movies were just classic movies. Like they were all just, not to say that Jim Carrey's movies were not classic, but you can't compare Harlem Nights to any of Ace Ventura, any of Jim Carrey's movies. You can't compare Trading Places with any of Jim Carrey's movies. All of Eddie Murphy's movies just kind of hit different, and even though, granted, all of those movies I just mentioned by Eddie Murphy came out like way before I was even born, but for some reason I still relate to them. I still relate to the character. And you know, I feel like there's a lot of meaning to the Eddie Murphy movies because when you think about this, the state of the United States in the '80s and the fact that he played so many roles as a cop and put like a funny edge to it or brought humor to it or like, like in Beverly Hills Cop, yeah, he was a cop in those movies, but he was good and corrupt at the same time. Like you can name a couple of crimes that he committed as a police officer in those movies. Trading Places, he didn't play. He actually played a criminal. He was a crook in Trading Places. Harlem Nights, crook. Um, so I don't know. When I look at like the big picture of Eddie Murphy movies, the time frame, what was going on in the country at the time, Eddie Murphy's movies just kind of hit different. They're classics. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I would say that I think Eddie Murphy's '80s movies definitely had more of an impact. That's just me.
Now, if you had to, so this, with this being said, if you had to wipe one away from history, and like no, you got take it or leave it. Jim Carrey's '90s movies, Eddie Murphy's '80s movies. Who you throwing away?
That's a hard one. And you have to answer this too.
Okay.
I love The Cable Guy. Once Bitten with Jim Carrey is one of my favorite movies. I don't care. Ace Ventura, one of my favorite movies. The Mask, one of my favorite movies. But I feel like if you wipe clean Eddie Murphy in the '80s, you have to get rid of Coming to America, which is like that movie Coming to America. Even though he was a prince, it was hilarious and it was like the epitome of the Black experience in the '80s and even in the '90s. Like the world was very similar at that time. You'd have to wipe that away. You'd have to wipe away Harlem Nights, which was a Richard Pryor movie, which certainly is a classic. You just can't get rid of that. With Della Reese, all these like people that were in that movie. I don't know. And then I'm big on stand-up comedy, and I think that Raw was one of the funniest stand-up comedies ever. Yeah. So I feel like if you wipe away Eddie Murphy's '80s movies, you're wiping away history. So Jim Carrey's '90s movies gotta go.
Gotcha.
But he still has the 2000s though.
Yeah,
he still has the 2000s.
I agree. So I feel like with Eddie Murphy, you take away his '80s, I think, which is some of his peak material. But I feel like he has a great stuff in the '90s and great stuff in the 2000s that we're like, okay. Versus if you take away Jim Carrey's '90s film, I think the rest of his stuff afterwards, takes a hit, outside of Me, Myself, and Irene and stuff like that. Yeah, I mean,
and Fun with Dick and Jane.
Yeah, you're looking at like only a select few, and then after that you're relying on like licensed stuff like Dr. Seuss stuff and Sonic and all that other stuff. But I'll give you that. Like I said, Eddie Murphy holds a special place in my heart in terms of some of the movies he's done. But I got to give major props to Jim Carrey for his run in the '90s.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. But I don't know. It's just I feel like it wasn't fair for us to compare his '90s to Eddie Murphy's '80s because they both. Yeah, but in this case, since Jim Carrey in the '90s is up against Eddie Murphy in the '80s, it's like it's a no-brainer. It's Eddie Murphy. Yeah.
Well,
Eddie Murphy in the '80s was historical.
I agree. Well, it was a pleasure, as always, speaking with you on these movie tidbits. So, when's the next video from you, Spoil Me?
We will see, God willing. I'm going to put out another video in the next couple of days about what I think is going to happen on Married at First Sight reunion. I have my theories and some spoilers, so I'm going to do a video about that. And I have a few more videos that I'm going to be coming out with in the next couple of days, God willing. So if you haven't done so already, like this video, make sure you subscribe and hit the notification button. There'll be more videos from me and my hubby soon.
Alrighty.
So, God bless. God bless. Peace.